So, welcome to all of you to our spiritual get together for June. The topic that was given by the sage, in a discussion with Amar Sood was practicing spirituality. So that's an interesting topic, you see, because we do read the scriptures, we do listen to people who are illuminated, but when it comes to our own individual spiritual journey, you see, until we reach that stage, what we call as you don't need to practice anymore until that point in time, in our quest for self-realization, then which leads to self-abidance, and then finally, you see, it leads to self-absorption. Uh, you see, at every juncture, whatever actually we listen or, whatever we read, it has to be practically put into practice in our day-to-day life. So this is an interesting topic that how the individual, the spiritual student will, you see, bring about that theoretical aspect into practicality, you see, and then by his own direct experience, realize his own true nature and thereby be in self-absorption. You see, I'm just going to touch upon one very fine point in this that actually, you see, being in self absorption is not difficult at all. You see, one of the great Hindu sages, Yog Vashisht, who had given 40,000 verses on reality to, Lord Rama, one of the Hindu deities or gods, going back 7,000 years before Christ, had said a very beautiful thing that self absorption is not attained either by the study of scriptures or by following a Satguru or by meditation or by any other means. But self absorption is only attained by the clarity of the student's understanding. So now this is quite interesting. Mark the word clarity. And how does actually clarity come? When actually you're able to yourself personally, practically see, you see, reaching at that ultimate knowledge and then living with that knowledge. So when we talk about practicing means that once you get these gems, once you know that these are the hallmarks that will lead to self-absorption, then you go back and revisit those little gems or little pieces of knowledge and keep at it. You keep on tugging at it until you have actually fully arrived. Now, you see, in reality, what they say is that everything, whether it is consciousness or it is these images, either of them is actually the same reality, right? But they go deeper and they say that actually you or I am that reality. Look at it. You see, this is what needs to be brought into practice because when you are there, there is consciousness and there is these images. When you are not there, there is nothing. So, what does that actually mean is, are you the supreme reality, right? Look at another aspect. You've got a higher nature and you've got a lower nature. Now, what is your higher nature? Higher nature is this changeless, ever present consciousness, which is illuminating this view in front of you, illuminating it even as we are talking, right? So, you see, uh, first of all comes this view. Look at it. This view is always there, and this view is illuminated by the consciousness, and this is not going to change. And the view is there, and the consciousness is there because actually you are there, right? So this is your higher nature. You got to revisit this all the time and see actually how does this view appear prior to everything, and you as an individual or an image are also appearing in this view. And then look at it. There is nothing outside the view. If there is nothing outside the view, that means everything that you see, your thoughts, your feelings, your birth, your life, your death, every other entity, their thoughts, every other God, what are they? You see, they are just rising and falling waves of this same consciousness. That is how you realize that these images, being in this screen of consciousness, being in your view, is none other than consciousness itself. So these are just like two gems which directly lead to self-absorption. But if I take my case, yes, I've gone very deep. I've practiced. I've looked at it. I don't need to now worry about all this. But you see, this was a communication from the Rishi that these gems are present in front of us. This knowledge is there, but we have to keep on revisiting, and that is really practicing. You see, that leads to clarity, and then that will lead to the freedom that practice is not required anymore. So anyhow, this is a very interesting topic. So I'll request Amar Sood ji, who is the convener and the speaker for this meeting or the satsang, to take over. Amar ji, can you please take over?
Thank you, Anilji, and pranam to everyone. I hope you all can hear me, and thank you, Anilji, for the lovely introduction, talking about practicing spirituality. As you said rightly, clarity is probably the key, and clarity comes with practice. And that's what I'm going to share my journey and as a seeker. So, and I think we all are seekers. And yes, we do get sometimes some, experiences which we think makes us very happy, but we still are in the process of finding out, seeking so-called this bliss or happiness. So I will just start with this topic, and I will start first with 3 times we will say the pranav om, which is a universal vibration sound. And then I will read one shloka from Yajurveda, and then we will start the topic. So let's say Om 3 times. Om. Next slide. Yeah. Om Vishwani Deva Savita Duritani Parasuva Yadbhadram Tanna Asuva. O the creator of the universe and the giver of all happiness, keep us from bad habits and bad deeds and calamities. May we attain everything that is auspicious. Om. The topic as we discussed today, next slide, is practicing spirituality. And I will refer to a quote which is given by Ramana Maharishi, and where it says, what is the object of our life? And the object is to understand who is that, and contained in that, your I. So the relationship between I and my is probably what we need to understand as we proceed towards this journey of practicing spirituality. Next, when we go to, before we start, I just want to make few humble, reminders which we all know, that it is something which I personally feel is not something very difficult. As Anilji said, that self-absorption is not difficult, and we also know that it is an inward journey, or inner engineering as we call it. And we are just trying to discover what we already have. And of course, when our interest becomes a passion with us and we practice, and definitely we have this wonderful journey, and which leads to the experience. And of course, as seekers, we are never tired of trying and working on this. Next. Yeah, and the same thing which has been now, what I just now said, we are looking at 3 basic areas, that is discovering ourselves, and the control is with us. And also, this discovery is going to lead us to peace, happiness, and ultimate bliss. And that's what our journey is all about. So let's look at our journey and how we move towards this. I have just taken a very simple example of a model where we say that anything, any work we want to do, we go through three steps. The first step is that we have the inputs, and then we work on those inputs to get an output. I can take a simple example. Let's say that you want to bake a cake. You need to have some inputs. Working on those inputs, you'll be working and probably put those ingredients in certain proportions to get an output. And that's how you are going to bake a cake. I think in our journey on practicing spirituality, we look at the inputs here, which I have broadly categorized into three parts, and we'll be looking at them in detail in a moment. And this includes our gross body, our subtle body, and of course, our consciousness, or what we call as our individual soul. And then the processes of working on these details of what has been given to us, and the purpose is only to work and improve upon what we already have, because we are not trying to find something which we do not have. All we are trying to do is to work on what is already given to us, and we are trying to rediscover, and we are trying to actually improve, creating more efficiencies in our existing system so that we feel closer to our consciousness or our awareness. And the output, as mentioned here, is clearly that we are looking for that so-called an experience of bliss or happiness, and it is called by different names, by self-realization, or we call it nirvana and things like that. So let's look at the first part of this journey, which is called input, and in that we're going to look at three sections. And next please. In this, we are first going to look at our physical body. And the physical body, we all know that we have our five sense organs, which we use all the time. And then we have also five organs of action by which we make movement in our day-to-day life. We speak, we use our hands, we use our feet, things like that. And apart from that, we have what we call as prana, or our vital life force. And this is what we can observe with our five senses. And most of the time, whenever we are in a state of awakeness, we are using these five senses, and then we take action, and then we are working based on this. And of course, the prana is already there all the time with us, and we'll be looking at prana a little later, probably to understand what is the importance of prana in our spiritual journey. Next, please. Now, apart from this gross body, which we just now briefly mentioned, another important aspect which we have is called the subtle body. In our scriptures, they talk about 17 different components of this subtle body. But as we all know that the word mind has been used by the Rishi everywhere. And what it basically means is the other subcomponents of this so-called mind, which we know is called as intellect or ego, or sometimes we call it as the cosmic intelligence also in Sanskrit is called chitta. And all these are the so-called the internal organs of our body, or of our physical appearance, which we use in our spiritual journey. And all this, whether it is physical body or the subtle body, it is all supported by our consciousness or by individual soul. So we'll move further and look at now the process. So this was a bit of a background, as in you can say the knowledge part or the theory part. Now we're going to look at the process. In the process, we are going to look at that how we start our spiritual journey. And I'm sure a lot of us probably have gone through these phases or stages, and we probably can relate to these ones. And the purpose is only to explain the spiritual journey, and then what practices some of us have used. And I'm sure that we all have gone through our own experiences, and probably we may have a slightly different, experiences, or maybe we may have used different methods. But probably all these methods were useful in our journey. So in this, we are talking about our physical resources given to us, which I am mentioning here in terms of place and time. And we are trying to align our body before we start our spiritual journey. And then we, of course, look at our subtle resources, where we'll be talking about our mind and also our awareness. We know, as Ramana Maharishi said, that we have to make an effort to attain this effortless state of stillness. So the process definitely needs an effort. As Anilji was mentioning, that the effort is not required once you have made enough effort that this effort has become your habit, or by practice you have made yourself perfect, then it becomes effortless for you. But probably at the beginning of this journey, we all have to go through and make an effort to move towards this practical aspect of spirituality. Let's go to the next slide. Here, I did mention earlier about the environment. And before we go to an environment, I'm going to take a simple example. If, for example, we need to go to our place of work, and it is, we do see that when we go to a place of work, we need to have, a frame of mind, and then we are ready to go to work. And then we say, yes, I need to go to work. And you have reasons why you want to go to work, whether you want to pay the bills, or you really like your work, or you think it's your duty. Similarly, when we start the journey, our spiritual journey, we probably already have these prerequisites. One is, of course, that we are, as mentioned here, we need to have a positive frame of mind, and that probably gives you inner smile, and that motivates you to embark on this journey. And another thing is called gratitude. Gratitude to whatever you have in this present life. You are grateful for that, and you have this firm faith and an intense desire to have that experience. And then you're seeking grace, because the grace is already there. You're trying to align, or you are trying to connect to that grace so that you can embark on this journey. We'll move forward. And when we look at the next one, the next slide, as I'm probably you can see on the screen, we go to the next slide now. Yes. And now, as I was taking the example of going to our place of work, we know that there's a fixed time when we need to go to our work, and then we finish work and come back. And then we, of course, have to have that bent of mind, a state of mind to take the tasks given to us at our place of work. Same thing happens in spirituality. We need to look at the physical resources provided to us. And it is quite common practice with the spiritual seekers that they will find at the beginning some time or a fixed time when they want to go through this experience or this spiritual experience. And as per our scriptures, we all know that the two times, the dawn and dusk, which are called the Sandhi Vela, or when the morning is about to, the day is about to begin, or in the evening when the day is about to end, is considered a very, very good time to start or to have this physical, or this spiritual practice. Of course, one can have it anytime. And the purpose is also to have this solitude, and so that one can focus and work on this spiritual experiences. And now the second aspect, which I think is now catching up a lot of importance all around the world, of people who practice yoga and also who are practicing spirituality, is called coherent breathing, which has been recently introduced by the Harvard University, where they say that you need to breathe in a proper way and in a certain style so that it will help you to concentrate and to feel better. That is one aspect. But we are aware of, we all already know that pranayama, which is, of course, is nothing else but the way you breathe and the way you practice, is a very important tool when we want to practice spirituality, and it helps you to calm your mind. And people, those who have wanted to meditate, they have noticed a very big advantage of doing pranayama before starting their meditation, because it leads to silence and stillness in your mind, and then it brings you closer to your reality, which is yourself. Going to the next slide. Now, as we also mentioned earlier, that we all know that what we are trying to do in this spiritual practice is nothing else but we are trying to unlearn and relearn. So what we already know, we want to unlearn that And one of them is that we spend all the time when we are awake, and that we follow our mind. And the mind takes us towards the sense organs and the sense objects, and that's where most of our time is spent. And that is very normal, and there's nothing wrong about it. But in spiritual practices, when we sit down, we find that it becomes a hurdle for us. And that's what the question has been asked, where it said a seeker is asking that how can we control our mind, and how can we bring it under control. And this is a classic example, I can say, probably the golden words uttered by the Rishi, that either we seek its source so that it may disappear, or surrender that it may be struck down. I think these two practices probably will sum up all the spiritual practices I have come across, that either we seek it to the source or we surrender. And we'll be talking about these two probably in the coming slides. So definitely the effort is required, and perseverance is also required if we really want to succeed in our spiritual practices or in our spiritual journey. Next. And now we'll have a look at the mind first. We all know about mind. We very commonly we say that mind is nothing else but a monkey. All the time it is jumping all around, bringing thoughts all the time, and that is the nature of the mind. And expecting that the mind will not bring thoughts is something. It means that the mind is not there at all. So it is going to happen all the time. So once we understand the nature of the mind, that it is there to bring thoughts all the time, and these thoughts are coming because of our direct experience with different sense objects. And also we have these so-called sanskaras, or tendencies, which are already sitting with us from our previous words, and that also will generate new thoughts in our mind all the time. So, and once we talk about the mind, we do understand that there are other components of the mind, which are also, we talk about the intellect and we talk about the ego. So these are other functions which are the subcomponents, I'll call, of the mind. And once we are aware of these, then we probably understand the working of mind probably slightly better than just working with sense objects and working on it. So in our spiritual journey, the role of mind is very, very crucial, and that's why Ramana Maharishi said that you need to look at the mind if you want to move forward in your spiritual journey. Going now to the next slide, as it said very clearly by Ramana Maharishi, that be a steady and a continuous investigation. So we need to investigate the nature of the mind, and then once we understand the nature of the mind, it will really help us to make to take steps forward, that how it works, what are the components of the mind, how does it react to different inputs receiving from the external world. Also, it gets inputs from our so-called past, impressions we have gained in our previous births. And once we understand the working of the mind, I think we start moving towards our spiritual journey by understanding the working of the mind. Let's go further now. Now, we are going to look at the first practice here, after understanding that we have created some understanding about our mind, and we will probably do this forever, because the mind is a wonderful tool as well as an instrument, probably one of our best friends and our worst enemy. So we work on it all the time. And when we think of the mind, we probably think it's some place, like where I can put my finger on and that's where it is. But as a matter of fact, every cell in our body, it has a memory and intelligence. So every cell of your body is contributing towards your mind. And so, in other words, it is not a certain area where you can say, I'll control this. It is basically each and every cell of your body which is contributing towards it. Two things which a seeker would notice, that in order to have a better understanding of the mind and make it work in your favor when we are trying to do a spiritual practice, is to look at the presence of mind. It is very clearly mentioned that the amount of time our mind spends in the present moment is very little as compared to the amount of time spent on the past events or the future events which have not yet come. It happens all the time that we are spending a lot more time or when we think about the past or we are thinking about the future. A simple practice to stay in the present moment will take away a lot of unnecessary thinking of your mind and will help you to absorb in yourself if the mind can stay in the presence. So the practice of staying in presence is probably a very simple tool which can help us in making spiritual progress. Now, another aspect which we can look at when we talk of mind is what we call as mindfulness and meditation. Mindfulness is another technique which is used by very quite popular in the Western world these days, where they will try to talk about the same thing as presence of mind, but they keep an object in mind. Whereas in meditation, we don't keep an object in mind, but we have the subject, and the subject here is our awareness. So they are quite similar techniques, but one probably is good for the beginners when we start, and then we might tag on our mind to one thought, one sound, one idea, one picture, and later on we move away from it, and then our mindfulness becomes our meditation. But the root or the main core of this practice would remain that the mind remains in the presence and not in the past, or remains in the present, not in the past or in the future. So this simple technique definitely is useful for a seeker who wants to move forward in spiritual practices. We'll go now to the next slide. Here, Ramana Maharishi says that one can turn the mind inwards and then merge it in God. The words are simple, but the practice is important. So the role of mind are threefold. That we know that our experience is beyond our gross body, subtle body. So mind is just a tool, and it helps us to cross over this physical world and takes us to the next level of the spiritual world. And presence of mind and deep contemplation are the tools which will help us to cross over our experiences in this physical world and to enjoy the experiences of the spiritual world. So in the process, that's what the mind is. That's why the mind is important. And from here, we'll now move to the next practice, and it is called witnessing. Witnessing is a very, very important tool, again, in our spiritual practices. And witnessing here, which is one of the most important statement which was mentioned right at the beginning by Ramana Maharishi, is about I and my. So we are talking here about positions and possessions. So the differentiation between what is I and what is my is what we need to focus at. And once we can discriminate, we have this power of discrimination that we can reject what is my and we can focus on the I. That is another important practice which is spiritually very, very useful for the seeker. And it is not easy, because the moment we wake up, our mind starts interacting with the stimuli we get from sense objects, and then we forget about I and my, and everything looks mine and my. So the differentiation between I and my, it is not there. So the practice of looking at the mind and looking at the body as two different entities is a lot more easier than looking at I and my. So I can clearly see that this is my body and this is my mind. When I look at my body, I can see with my eyes. And when I close my eyes, I can see my mind, because I know the functions the mind can do, which we discussed earlier. So differentiation between mind and body will lead us to the next level of differentiating between self and mind. So once we can easily differentiate between body and mind, we can move to the next level where we can see the self and the mind. So initially the mind looks at the body, then later on the self looks at the mind, and then the mind looks at the body. And this practice of witnessing these three components, and then knowing that everything is in the self, but we generally operate either at a mind level or at a physical level. But if we can keep all these three perspectives in mind and then move on in our day-to-day activities, I think that gives a lot of peace and quiet and calmness in our activities, and that helps us to move again towards our spirituality. And also, so witnessing, I think, is another important, interesting tool, which I think we all try to practice, and sometimes we succeed, and sometimes we need to bring our attention to it again and again so that we can understand it. I will now move to the next one. That is, in order to witness, very standard practices which is mentioned in our scriptures is the 4 stages, which are called listening, contemplation, then we drive at the truth, and then we start living the experience. These are words which we all have seen, but since we are talking about the practice, so the best thing is to take an example, like when we talk about driving a car. I remember when we started learning driving a car or a bicycle as when we were kids. First, somebody gives us the instructions, and these instructions can be either listening or maybe through some book or whatever. And after that, we try to digest, or we try to reflect and try to understand that information. And once we have understood and digested that information, we try to put that information into practice. And when we practice, when we apply the next stage, the third stage, we find a lot of obstacles, pitfalls, and then over a period of time we overcome those difficulties. And once we overcome those difficulties, then it becomes our second nature. And as we all know that when we drive now, because we have been driving for so many years, we can drive, we can listen to music, we can talk to somebody over the phone, we can do the thinking, and still things go on well. So this is another example that of witnessing is like when we start witnessing our mind and our body and ourself, we can do everything, whether they are our worldly functions, or whether we are having a thought process, or whether we are feeling the presence of our individual soul or our awareness. All this can happen at the same time, and this witness probably is a very interesting and very important tool in our spiritual journey. I'm going to go to the third practice now, which is called alertness. Alertness and the next one, which will be discussed later on, which is called grace. They all go hand in hand. Now, alertness is something which we all understand is very important, because it is very common for us to just forget about the basics, what we are discussing in our spiritual journey, because we either get bogged down with our day-to-day activities, or we tend to go in the past and future and start worrying about things which are not going to happen. And then once we lose this alertness, in other words, we lose our contact with the awareness. So alertness, when we talk of alertness, we are talking about alertness to the wandering of the mind. The mind wanders everywhere, here and there. It reminds me of a very interesting story between a Zen master and his disciple. Those who were walking together, and the disciple said, the master, that I have been with you for so many years, but I have no experience whatsoever about awareness. So how do I enter this state of consciousness? And the master looked at his disciple. He said, can you hear the sound of the mountain stream? And the disciple said, no, I can't hear. He said, if you pay attention and you remain alert, you will be able to hear. And the disciple still insisted that he cannot hear the sound of the mountain stream. And then as they started walking with concentration, and after some time, he could hear the sound of the mountain stream. So that's where that master said, with the alertness, if you can hear this, with the same alertness, you can enter your awareness, and that is what your experience is. And in this example, they are using alertness as in listening. The same alertness can be used by other sense organs too. So alertness to the source is very, very important, and that does come with practice. Otherwise, alertness is always there. Only thing is our attention is not there, and then we do not feel this alertness. So as we all know that once we are alert to awareness, mind will stop wandering here and there, and it will focus on our awareness. Now, moving to the next practice, and that is we are talking about the knots. When I use the word knots, I'm talking about the knot between our gross and subtle body, and the awareness is very much present. And in the presence of this awareness, this knot is there, and we are unable to separate our gross body from our subtle body, and that's why the feeling or the false notion is always present that I am the body, not that I am awareness and I have a gross body and I have a subtle body. In the next slide, as I will just show it to you. Yes, in this we clearly see that there are two knots of one of the gross body and the other of the subtle body, and in the middle the awareness is present all around this. And in order to untie this knot or to unwind this knot, we need a major paradigm shift. And this paradigm shifts is again going to come through our practice. And the practice is simple by distancing ourselves from our body. In other words, we are trying to address our body as we are addressing a friend or a second person. So when you say that my name is John, you don't say that I'm John, but you talk to your body or whatever the mind says. It is not you are saying it, but it is what John is saying. So you are in touch. You are witnessing that the conversation going on in your body, between your physical body or in your mental body, between them, or whatever exchange is taking place. It is mainly because of you being a witness to it, and you can see that the conversation going on between these two. If you start observing that, that practice can lead to untying or unwind this knot of physical and physical and subtle body. And that conversation is so important that all the time this conversation with this body or with this person or with the name given to you will keep you, or you become a witness, and this witness helps you to separate yourself from this so-called our gross and subtle body, and you being the awareness of it. So conversation and keeping a distance, it really helps us. And it apart from this conversation we have with ourselves, we can also look at some affirmations or some positive thoughts which have been given to us by our by the sages. And I will just now look at two affirmations which I think are important. The first affirmation comes from, as the sage Ramana Maharishi says, God carries all the burdens and gives us peace. So this affirmation, whenever we are going through our journey of a spiritual journey, we know that there is someone who is supporting us, who is looking after us, and who is very keen to provide us or take us to the next level. And the second affirmation, which is about the faith. And in this one, it simply says that don't give up, never give up, just keep going. Have that faith that you will be there. And and once you are there, then you won't have to go anywhere. You'll be there forever. So these affirmations, whatever we read, and whatever comes to our mind, it tells us that we don't have to give up, but to keep going with this. We'll move on to the next part or the next practice, which I have labeled it as grace. And here, grace works, and how it works, I just want, with the experience and with the understanding I would like to share is this, that our spiritual teachers, our gurus, they push our mind inwards from externally, and they pull the mind towards the self internally. This push and pull is happening all the time. And when this is happening, and as it is said that we take one step and our guru or our self or our awareness takes 10 steps to take us towards it. So we don't have to acquire this grace because it's already there. And as it is said, when our mind turns inward, it rushes within you like a spring sprouting. The moment our mind is turned inward, the grace starts, and it is already there. Only thing is, it's a matter of connecting. And the moment you connect with the grace, and it starts working with us. And at times, because of our past experiences, because of other reasons, we find that we are unable to connect, then I think surrender to the source which is within us does help us to get connected with our grace. Going to the next slide, and as Ramana Maharshi is mentioning here that this source or this grace is already with us. All we need to do is to connect with us, and then we have to merge with it, and that's all we have to do. So once we just surrender, once we surrender ourselves, it's just a matter of time that we'll find that the grace starts to flow and our experiences will increase. Moving to the next one now, as mentioned here very clearly, also once again, that when we try and we think that we are not happy or we are not satisfied with our spiritual journey, simple answer given by the sages, just surrender. But when you surrender, still you do not give up. You keep trying and surrender, and it's just a matter of time that we start feeling these so-called experiences in our spiritual journey. Moving to the next one, and the last part of our spiritual journey is all about the output, what we can expect, which is explained again in the next slide, where it is all about our bliss, all about the moksha, and basically it is which was already with us because we have that discovery which has happened because of the gap or the distance between our physical and mental self and the pure self. That distance has been reduced, or probably it has been negated, and that bliss starts to appear because we get rid of one and then we get closer to our own reality. Moving to the next slide. The summary of this outcome of our practical, our spiritual journey is that we feel peace and calmness, happiness. Then we feel that I'm not the body; it is there all the time. And then we have the presence in the presence, which means we live in the present moment and we accept everything, and then we remain the way we are. So. As Ramana Maharshi puts it very nicely, that people are expecting something to happen, something to drop from heaven in a flash. It is nothing of that sort. Only the notion that you are the body will go and you remain as you are. So the moment the notion of body is gone, you are very much in self-absorption and you are very much having that wonderful experience of your own true nature. Moving forward, I have just been able to put few words together. I'm playing a bit with the words. So when we use this word as who am I, it is nothing else but this journey of input, process, and output. Input, when we talk, the tools which have been given to us, we have who we are, what we have are the tools which we discussed earlier about our physical body, our subtle body and consciousness. And then we work on these tools given through witnessing, through alertness, through surrender and grace, and what we get is peace and calmness. It is also explained by the three words what you called Om Tat Sat, or we use the word Sat, Chit and Anand, or we can say the first step input is nothing else but having the knowledge, and the second process nothing but the action, and third one is nothing else remaining in the company of your self, which is also defined by the word jnana, karma, and upasana. And that is what is also mentioned in our scriptures or the three Vedas. To sum up, all these three steps, I have just put it in one word, and I use the word called always, which basically I would say that always remain live to your witness or witness your awareness and to your stillness. So if you remain alert, I think, so the first word is not always, it should be always remaining alert to your living witness and to your stillness. That leads to your, wonderful experience all the time of your spiritual, experiences. And now we have just looked at these 5 different practical spiritual practices. First is that we should mind our mind. In other words, we should know what for the mind is there and direct the mind what the mind should be doing and not wandering around. And then, of course, we talked about the witnessing and the alertness. Then we also talked about untying the knot of I and my. And last but not least, we talked about the surrender and the grace. And I will probably move to the conclusion of this. I will just do a concluding prayer. And after that, I will hand over to Anilji and others to make their comments. Thank you once again to all of you. And I will just now go with the concluding prayers. Om Deo Shanti Antariksham Shanti Prithvi Shanti Rapaha Shanti Roshadaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishve Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Savargam Shanti Shanti Deva Shanti Sama Shanti Redhi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Amarji. Very beautiful. It's quite interesting that you have reached quite a depth in your own spiritual journey, which was reflected in what you were actually communicating. It's beautiful, but I presume that one reaches at these stages of self-absorption from one end to the other, and you can only communicate this way if you have personally actually gone through the practice of spirituality to reach that point where the practice is not required anymore. Beautiful, actually. Very well communicated, Amarji. Thank you very much for your effort. Vijayji, can we now conclude today's satsang?
Basically, all the slides were talking about the various practices, and those practices are reflected in all the various yoga that we talk about. When you talk about karma yoga, when we talk about bhakti yoga, we talk about uh, Raj yoga, which is Ashtanga yoga, and we talk about Jnana yoga. All these practices are in a manner essentially to try and get rid of the ego, which is a notional thing which is not actually real. We only consider that I is real, that ego is real, and the connection with the body, that I am this body. In reference to reality, it's never the case, but because the feeling is there, there needs to be practices. There needs to be some practice to be able to get rid of that. Now, if you look at karma yoga is basically doing action without feeling that I am doing it. As it were, it's like saying my left hand does not know what my right hand is doing. And those are the practices that need to be incorporated to try and transcend the ego, as it were. Now, that is the karma yoga part of it. Then you've got the bhakti yoga. Bhakti yoga is typically in what we discussed just now is surrender. And that surrender is primarily the love that you have for that supreme. And when you surrender, you're surrendering something that you consider as you, and you surrender it completely, though nothing is yours anyway. But because that feeling is there, you're surrendering. And when that surrender is happening, one of the practices which was spoken about was looking at it from the perspective as a third party, not as me, myself, but considering it as a third party. But when you reference it in society as uh, rather than if we say, no, I'm not doing this, but Vijay seems to be saying this, it doesn't sound very right. So what we can do is one of the practices that is subscribed is rather than using the first person in reality, you can use that as a third person, as in a passive tone. Instead of saying I am doing this work, rather than emphasizing I as the subject, as the ego, put that in the third person in the passive tone, saying the work which is primary, is being done by me. So this is a practical way of trying to use that as a third person rather than saying I am doing it. The work is being done by me. So there are subtle changes that happen in the mind lake of consciousness where the vrittis, as they say in Ashtanga Yoga, the where uh, the cessation of those vrittis, those uh, fluctuations on the mind lake are reduced. Once, by constant practice and the effort, we reach a position where the third person is not required, then whatever comes out, let that come out. When the abidance and the absorption is complete, then it doesn't really matter whether you call it I or me, or it makes no difference. It's only the association which causes a problem. And the association through the inquiry, which Bhagwan Raman Maharshi has said, the two methods are through inquiry and surrender. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna has said that, Lord Krishna has said that the two methods are practice and vairagya, which is detachment. You detach yourself from that feeling that I am this body by the various practices that you're using. And once that those practices lead to that complete detachment, then the disassociation takes place. And then the dropping away of the I and the ego takes place to transcend the mind. Because as it was said, the mind is a bundle of thoughts in consciousness. But the association is done as in they are my thoughts. Thoughts may be there in consciousness floating around because all this is within consciousness. This I, me, myself, the feeling that I'm doing it, the notional feeling of the ego is all within consciousness. So when that witnessing takes place, when that keen desire to transcend the limited is intense, automatically grace pours in. And grace is always there, but it cannot be accessed because one has not attuned oneself to that grace. To be able to attune oneself, one has to be completely detached, not physically from the rest of the world, which you cannot do, but within. And when that takes place, when the inquiry takes place within, automatically the mind dissolves. Because when you seek the source, the outwardness is not there anymore. The inwardness happens. The mind collapses to reach that source to find that there is no I per se, no ego as such. This inquiry and surrender both lead to the same goal because when there is a surrender, the I, the ego is given up. When that giving up is happening, the concept of association dissolves. The same with the I. When the sorry, when the, with the inquiry, when the inquiry takes place and when the diving in takes place, the giving up of the ego happens when the I is sourced because you find that there is no I because there is no other. The world, the I and the other comes about only when there is the other. I is there and the other is there. But when the seeking takes place by going in and the I dissolves, the other is not there anymore. So these two methods are primary and extremely important. And Amarji related all these various practices in a beautiful manner to try and sum up these practices in common parlance without using technical too much of technical words so that it could be accessed by everyone in society, whichever whatever background they are from. So it is a beautiful summary, Amarji. Thank you so much. And uh, if there are any questions, we could take them, and Anilji may be able to respond back if required.
Yeah,
Hari
yeah.
Om Tat Sat.
Is there anyone wants to have a discussion? Like to speak something? You're most welcome. Yeah, because we are having this recording, so yeah, we have to have always someone talking. Because once we put it on our channel, there's so many people watching. Anyone wants to say something? Damodaranji, you want to say something? Damodaranji is quiet today. Yeah. Okay. If there's no questions, no discussion, then probably we'll conclude, Vijayji.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
that's okay.
I think we'll do the
I think
conclusion.
Bindu ji's put up a hand to ask a
Okay.
question.
Yes, Binduji.
Yes,
Yeah, please.
hello to everybody. Very nice discussion, but it all went above my mind. I think I'll have to really sink into it to understand from
Yeah.
Anilji. You really have to give me some time. It's
Yeah.
very beautifully said, but I think when we practically have to do it, it looked. I mean, I'm very fearful. It looks very difficult to
Yeah.
handle the
Yeah.
mind and be all the time mindful and alert and aware. Very difficult. Surrender is
Yeah.
okay, yes.
Yeah.
Partially we do it and
Yeah.
we can try more. So I think you'll have
Actually,
to really, really help take my hand and guide me.
yeah. Yeah. But Binduji, actually, it only looks complex because we are looking at all this from, say Anilji's perspective or Binduji's perspective. But really, as I had explained at the start, when that clarity of understanding comes, then all these things become quite natural. Because look at it, you see, when we talk about surrender, isn't the so-called individual identity surrendering anyway to consciousness? I mean, without being conscious of whatever we are actually doing, how can we function, right? There's no way
Yes,
that we can function. So what we call as a surrender is actually natural. That is our natural state, right? And
yeah,
then when we talk about self-absorption, even that is our natural state because you have got your universal nature which you never left. Tell me, I mean, is there any point in your life that you left consciousness? You never did.
no, no,
You see?
never, never.
But the only thing is that we don't focus upon this very simple thing, which the sage has actually so beautifully explained that look, consciousness is ever present. Consciousness is ever present, and in these, all these images are present, and these images are none other than this consciousness only. You've got a twofold nature. One is the changeless reality, the consciousness, and the other is this wondrous nature, this changing reality. So it is all a question of the right knowledge. As I had said, it's very,
Correct.
very beautiful actually. When the clarity comes, then naturally you are absorbed in the state of self-absorption. But that is the journey to reach to that point. And you
Yes,
see, no one, neither Anilji or Ramana Maharishi or Rishi Master Byansa Duno can actually take someone there. All that they can do is just like today. Look at with Amarji when we have had all these satsangs. But today you could see the very cream of what is pouring from within him because that is
mm,
basically what he is living as, right?
yes,
Vijayji seems
yes,
to be talking always about these things. But Vijayji, many, many years ago crossed that state and doesn't need to practice anymore.
mm,
So it's
yeah,
all a matter of, being associated with the right people, being guided by the right people, and then eventually attaining that clarity. And then one is actually free. Because remember, whether it is Sage Ramana or Anilji, or Ramana Maharishi, or Jesus Christ, or Gautam Buddha, or yourself. That same light of consciousness is present in everyone, isn't it? And they have all come as images. So the two are actually identical. That is what is to be realized. So,
Binduji, just one small point.
mm,
It appears that you're putting ahead of you all kinds of barriers mentally before you have even started by saying that, oh, it's so difficult, it's so I'm fearful and difficult. The
Yeah.
moment you do that, these barriers you're setting up, and that itself causes hurdles on the path. Rather than that, if you consciously say that I've been told that it's easy, it's a really easy thing because I'm already that very thing. So even if the appearance is there that it's difficult, let that be, keep that aside. You continue and try and do those practices which are given, practical practices, without putting barriers ahead of you and hurdles ahead of you. The moment you put these non-existent hurdles that they are this difficult and this so and so, you are already starting off on the wrong foot.
Mm.
Suggestion is be positive because this is something that you already
Already.
are. So don't worry about all these conceptual, because the ego is always trying to ensure that it remains,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
ego
Yeah.
puts these barriers in front of you. So
Correct.
don't worry about it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I've been reading, but now when it comes to application, somewhere again it fails. Maybe because sir is saying proper guidance is lacking or something. So
uh,
that gives me a little
There's no
fear.
proper guidance or anything lacking, Binduji. You try and you put your alertness hat on. I could just see someone putting a
That's
hat
what
on.
you're
So
saying. That's what you're saying. So you're guiding on me, na? We are very worldly people,
yes,
not
yes,
like
yes.
you. And I'm sure with your help and
Anil,
maybe guidance, we will really do it.
Thank you.
Thank you a lot. Thanks a lot.
sure, sure, Bindu, sure. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else wanting to say anything?
Krista.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, we can hear you.
Um,
Yeah.
I have a question with regards to why is the death of the individualized self so frightening?
Say that again.
Why is the death of the individualized personality, ego self,
Yeah.
a frightening thing?
That's an interesting question. You see, the thing is this, that why it has actually become frightening is that, in the course of our evolution, you see, for us to participate in this so-called space-time creation, we ourselves have become an image, and we have become so absorbed and so merged in that image that we have actually forgotten our true nature, right? So when you talk about frightening, it is basically, you see, when you look at this so-called individuality, it's always worried about itself, isn't it? It's always trying to do the best for itself, and it's always fearful of leaving the physical body, when death comes, and moving elsewhere, because body consciousness will be lost. So basically, the question of being frightened actually comes from there, because your lower nature, you see, is in link with all these what we call as the lower nature spirits, like fear, anger, hatred, envy. But when you touch your higher nature, when you touch your true nature of consciousness, then the two actually merge together. So if you think that you are an individual, you are separate from everything, then the thing is just you got to go along and play along with everything, all the bad packages that come with it, right? But if you move on to your higher nature, then you see, being frightened, being fearful, someone dying, someone having a disease, all these things you will understand with clarity, and that peace will continue to abide and remain. So that's my take on, your query. I don't know whether I've addressed what you're exactly asking. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have. I mean, it's just I know that, like, because I've done a fair bit of listening to some David Godman interviews, and I find them very interesting. And he speaks of how Ramana queried, like how his self-realization was at the point where he laid down and sort of started to inquire about death.
Yeah.
And I just think, I don't know where I'm leading with this, but I think that I suppose that what you're saying I hear, because I think it's a natural human individualized I self that fears death. I don't think there's too many people that
Sir, I
don't fear
think
death.
because we associate with the physical body more, so we are fearful of the death.
Yeah,
So
so
what is,
then
because
the
of the physical body, we feel that death is frightening. Otherwise, death is only passing over. So the main thing remains, consciousness is always there. It never finishes. We get
correct,
attached
but
to the physical form, I think.
I think that it's hard to detach from that innate human separate I fear of death, which is completely different from the self-realization death of the individualized I self, which is the association with mind and body. But it's just a kind of a tricky thing.
Yes, Krista, that primarily it is it's the fear of nothing else, because you can't fear death because it is unknown. You have no idea. How can you fear something that you don't even know? It is the fear is more of losing what you know, what you
Yes.
think you know, and that is the issue. Fear of the unknown cannot be. It's the fear of what is no losing what you know is the issue, and what you know is not even what you are, because it is not you. So that's when fear will drop off, because if you are not what you are going to lose, what you think you're going to lose, then you are that supreme consciousness, that your pure awareness, ever present, always were, always are, and always will be. So there is no question of losing anything, but that association causes the fear of losing what you think is yours. That is the problem.
I think you're gaining the actuality of existence, but it's a really I hear what you're saying. It's just it's I think, like, because I've had I guess that I can move in and out of self-awareness, but the thought of like moving beyond that in and out to actual self-realization, and that there's no coming back. But why would you want to come back anyway? It's just a realization of what you actually are. It's just that kind of almost like when you go skiing and you have to jump off a cliff and there's no turning back.
Fair enough. Yeah.
It's kind of like that, like
the leap of faith.
It's a leap of faith, and that is really, as a human being, a very tricky step to take.
I think, Krista, I will just add a couple of words. I think as we grow, right from our childhood, a lot of things were important to us as a kid. If I lost my toy, I would have cried a lot, and I would have complained to my mother and to everyone else. And when I grew up, and when I think about it, it is of no consequences whatsoever for me today. Similarly, when I was growing up, I thought if I don't do well in my studies, probably I will not do well in life. But now when I look at my life, I think it was not that important. So similarly, a lot of things we give importance as of now, and as we grow, or as we know the reality, whether it is death, whether it is ego, whether it is mind, whether it is thoughts, they are just a play happening around. It's like you observe them, you know how they are important to you, and then you just move on because you know who you are. You are that self, and you are very much centered there. And this is the play happening all around. Initially, yes, I get disturbed but later on, I don't even get disturbed. If somebody shouts at you for the first time, you say, why? Later on, you say, oh, I know why this person shouts. Similarly, your mind goes elsewhere. You know why it goes there. Oh, your ego gets hurt. Now you know why it gets hurt. You can come back. And the moment you come back, you're coming back to yourself. And that gives you peace to start with, happiness. And later on, probably it becomes your habit. And then you live with it. And that's what I think the journey is all about.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Any other questions or queries? Anyone wants to participate? Because these are open forums, It's not that it's just exchange of knowledge, exchange of views, Everyone is at the same platform, same playing field.
But Anilji, I think you said you want to conclude by 5:15. It's nearly 5:15 now. So
Yeah. Okay. Let's conclude. Let's conclude, Vijay.
um, we'll just do one Om and a concluding prayer. Om. पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. O adorable Lord of mercy and love, salutations and prostrations unto thee. Thou art omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient. Thou art Satchidananda. Thou art the indweller of all beings. Grant us an understanding heart, equal vision, balanced mind, faith, devotion, and wisdom. Grant us inner spiritual strength to resist temptations and to control the mind. Free us from egoism, lust, greed, hatred, anger, and jealousy. Fill our hearts with divine virtues. Let us behold Thee in all these names and forms. Let us serve Thee in all these names and forms. Let us ever remember Thee. Let us ever sing Thy glories. Let Thy name be ever on our lips. Let us abide in Thee forever and ever. Let us abide in Thee forever and ever. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Okay, thank you, Vijayji, Amarji, and everyone, for having given your time and come together as a family, participated in this spiritual meeting. So we'll meet again on the second Sunday of July, same time, and I'll send out, a reminder. Thank you very much. We conclude.